右还是在那写？啊，在这个后面，就是这个。Hello。你不刻意在写，写了一个，这就是形式推这儿。这，咱过了。我站着了，然后但是我现在发你们，今天生活发出来，不交换了，现在还没写到呢。6可以。为什么这种模态加个0啊？就你那边给我再给你。我不知道，可以啊，但是这样的话，多一个字，多一个人，反射到。就是这样很好玩。
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's get to it. How are you all doing? How are you feeling? How is homework 5 going for you? It's going just fantastic. How many of you are building on all 3 platforms? Okay. How many are building on 2? And 1? Okay. How are the test cases going for you? One very interesting thing to me is figuring out where your time is going. And I have a suspicion that a lot of your time on this assignment is going to the build process, which isn't really where we want to go. How is that going?
My time's okay. Yeah.
It was okay?
It's like slow, but it's okay.
How many hours did you lose just getting things to build?
Oh, a lot.
8?
Days.
Wow.
Yeah, it's at least 8 plus.
At least 8 plus. Yeah.
That's me. I just slapped that pretty quickly.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, I want you all to know we appreciate your sacrifice. This is going to be the hardest version of Homework 5 that will ever exist. Next semester we will have more tutorials for you. We will have a video not just for the Windows platform, but also getting things to build on Mac and on Linux. I think we underestimated just how difficult that process was going to be, and I feel you. Like, it is a difficult process. Navigating all the UI, navigating the errors. There's a lot to link, a lot to include. And so we definitely want to make sure that things are smoother in the future, and that includes in this course too. I understand it's kind of cold comfort to hear that things are going to be easier in the future. But just know that I do appreciate all the advice that you give, the feedback, and I appreciate the time and the friction that you've got on this project. Okay, so hang in there. Okay, there is a reason the extension was 48 hours, and in fact, right now you have 48 hours to get it in. Okay, hopefully you're feeling pretty good. Hopefully that time will help you. Reminder: you don't have to feel bad about starting homework 6 late. We're going to launch that today, but it is delayed as well, okay? It's delayed 24 hours. So I would say if you are getting up there to 80, 90% in the next 24 hours, then you are definitely on track, okay? And shouldn't worry too much, all right? Our mission today is pretty simple. We want to launch homework 6, okay? We'll talk to you a little bit about what that homework's going to be like. Fortunately, can anyone tell me the new dependencies for homework 6?
There's nothing.
Nothing. All right, homework 6 is simply an advancement, an extension of homework 5. You do not need any new dependencies, but your logic, your gameplay logic will be getting more interesting, more complex. And hopefully you'll enjoy that. It's going to start feeling more and more like a typical game, and it's going to get more and more expressive as well. Do we have any artists in the room? Right? Hopefully, as the expressiveness of your engines grows, you will have an opportunity to start customizing things, start messing around with your engine. One of the, I think, saddest things about the way the course is currently structured is we don't quite have enough time to use these engines that you're making, not until the end of the course. So I hope you will hang in there and stay strong, okay? All right, I have a game engine for you today. This is a prolific engine that has had immense impact in the industry. It is also one of the harder engines to use these days. It is the engine that kind of delivered Valve Corporation and Steam to where they currently sit, right? And it is the Source engine. It is kind of a heavily modified version of the Quake engine, which the Quake engine kind of came as the successor to the Doom engine that we talked about a bit earlier, okay? What game is Source famous for? Anyone know? Yes?
Half-Life.
Half-Life. Yep, Half-Life and Half-Life 2, okay? And this was, these games were actually some of the first games that launched with Steam. And in fact, if you wanted to play Half-Life 2, you had to install Steam, okay? There was no choice. You had to get that game through Valve's platform, which really gave them a huge boost in the kind of digital PC distribution market, okay? It was released in 2004. It is a AAA game engine that you can license. If you are a third-party developer, you can grab Source and you can make your next game with it, all right? One really interesting question I'll ask you in a bit is, why didn't it take off? I recall being in middle school and seeing that Source was downloadable, right? It was available, you could use it, you can make maps with it, and yet we're not using Source today. The vast majority of indies, vast majority of game devs are using something like Unity, Unreal. So what happened? Why did Valve miss their chance? It has a GitHub. This 2013 version of Source, this is Source 1, not Source 2, which Valve currently uses, is open source. You can find it on GitHub. You can mess around with it if you want to. It's famous for Half-Life 2, and when Half-Life 2 came out, you can kind of see it right here. This was 2004, okay? And games in 2004 generally did not look like this, okay? Did not have realistic physics, did not have realistic emotional, expressive characters and animations. Half-Life 2 was seemingly a generation ahead of its time, and its technology was a big part of that, okay? You can see here, for instance, a puzzle involving physics manipulation to establish this ramp so you can kind of get up this ledge here.
With this physics puzzle in Half-Life 2, where you had to put all these bricks on this side of the ramp to be able to jump on top of this platform so you could continue. Did you know there are 25 ways to solve this? Or even more? You can put stairs for bricks instead. Or just one big stair to jump on. Use a brick as a ramp. Keep jumping and picking up the rope. Or a harder way of spelling using jump key. Discover their help from a brick. Why not get some help from an explosive barrel that it can find in the map right before the physics puzzle? I'm gonna climb here so that I skip a bunch of triggers that would make the guards throw more explosive barrels at me and thus blowing up my barrel as well. I'm gonna fly here to get the barrel to the other side safely and now be here. Since the barrel's explosive damage throws me away, I can use that to solve this puzzle. Or stand on it like this.
Right. Okay. So just from this, a huge number of the puzzles in this game were at the time you just didn't see this kind of puzzle, right? Very, very much physically based, and it really helped the engine and this game kind of set itself apart. It is the engine behind very well-known titles such as Portal, right? Has anyone heard of Portal? Okay. In fact, this game has an amazing story. A DigiPen team had been making a game very similar to Portal, basically a Portal prototype, when Gabe Newell, who lives in the area, DigiPen is pretty close to both Nintendo, Microsoft, and Valve, basically went to their presentation and hired the lot of them. And the small team jumped in and started using Source and built Portal into the final game. Anyway, very well-known indie title. Counter-Strike, anyone play that? Okay, Counter-Strike, right? Team Fortress 2, and one of the more interesting recent ones, Titanfall. So this is a game not made by Valve. Who makes Titanfall? Our beloved Electronic Arts. They're Respawn Entertainment subsidiary. And again, Respawn is the company that cannot seem to decide on an engine. They keep jumping back and forth. So Titanfall, Apex Legends were both Source 2 games. And Jedi Survivor, their recent title is Unreal Engine 5, I think. Anyway, kind of interesting stuff. The engine is also very moddable. Has anyone ever heard of a product called Garry's Mod? Right? Garry's Mod, a very, very hackable game. It is all about kind of unique custom servers, game types. When you play Garry's Mod, you never quite know what you're going to run into. And a lot of that is enabled by kind of the flexible nature and available nature of the Source engine. One really interesting thing about the Source engine is that if you've bought pretty much any of Valve's games, you have access to it. In fact, I think maybe not a lot of you know this. Let me see if I can get Steam running here. So what you can do here is you can actually sort. Usually it's just by games. You see a bunch of games here. But when you buy games, they often come with tools, and you can find them by going up to your games filter, turning on tools instead, and you will find all sorts of different development tools for the games you already own. You can launch them, and you can use them to start creating maps. One of those is the Source SDK, which is right here. When you launch it, you get this menu that looks like it is from the 90s, and you can launch a bunch of kind of separate, kind of distinct tools to help you build out maps for the Source engine. For instance, the Hammer editor. This thing looks old, it feels old, and it does not work without basically hacking this. You have to go and download some files online, and it is not really an integrated editor. This is an engine that instead has a bunch of kind of separate tools for different purposes. So for instance, when you look at the menu, you've got a tool for editing maps. You've got a separate tool for the model viewer. You've got a tool for posing faces, testing items, and other stuff as well. This was very much the way it was on The Sims 4. We did not have our own integrated engine like a Unity or an Unreal. We didn't have a beautiful UI. We had a very ugly, like Visual Basic, like toolbar that looked like this actually. And if you wanted to do different things, you'd click different buttons, enable different settings, and then really ugly looking tools would show up that were very custom built for the engine we had. So not integrated, but it does have a lot of different tools you can use with it. It apparently has a scripting language that is Lua-like. They called it Squirrel. The engine itself is available. You can read the wiki online. I'll tell you, you think Unreal Engine documentation and community forum posts are bad. Just wait. Just wait until you get into the Steam and Source ecosystem, okay? It appears to be far worse. One interesting thing, we can kind of see some footage of the engine being used. You've heard of spaghetti code, okay? I would like you to get a taste now of risotto code. Let's take a look.
back when you're working on Half-Life 1 or Half-Life 2 era stuff, you're not really coding in a language. To script all the level logic, you have to use entities. And these entities are like icons or like visual things inside the world. So when you are scripting, okay, first Gordon Freeman will walk in here, and then that'll trigger the door, and the door will close, and then you have to trigger this sound, trigger that sound. Each of those is like an independent thing that like the level designer had to make and then manually like connect to this other thing. So what happens is that instead of getting like spaghetti code, you have like paella code or like risotto code, where it's not like it's not a long line of all these words in this programming language. It's literally just visual noise of 100 icons and trying to remember which of those icons to attach that logic.
Right. This is to say that spaghetti code and couplings, right, that start to make things difficult, dependencies, right, they are not inherent to a textual language. Whenever you are dealing with objects and relationships and dependencies, you will have a potential to create the spaghetti code environment, okay? Doesn't matter if it's textual or if it is something more visual and kind of icon-based like what you see up here. This is the tool, the Hammer editor, that we just tried to open, except this time it actually seemed to work. So anyway, there you go. You got to see the Hammer editor actually working, at least in one still frame. It was famous for its very realistic physics. I think it was one of the first big-time integrations of the Havok physics engine, which is pretty successful these days. There is a free and open source engine from NVIDIA, which is popular, PhysX. But for a while, Havok was kind of the main thing that you'd use, and it was kind of without peer. One question is, why didn't this engine take over? Valve is certainly not against making money. In fact, they seem to be doing a lot of that these days and not quite as much game dev as they could be. All right, so why didn't they jump at the chance to turn Source into the next Unity? Did they just miss it? They are a small team. They're not that big. Any ideas? Yeah, in the back.
Creating something as large and featureful and complex as Unity is really expensive.
It definitely is. It definitely is. So is VR, though. VR headsets, Valve Index. Yes?
I mean, from what I've heard, it sounds like Source was just a mess by the time they finished making Half-Life 2. That, like, to try to make something good out of that for commercial usage would be very hard.
So Source is a mess, maybe, right? I mean, that would make sense. It could be. But that doesn't really explain why other companies have been able to use it. And we did, after Half-Life, get a lot of great titles out of it. Sometimes even student teams, right? Jumping into Source and knocking out Portal, for instance. Okay? Maybe the engine is just simply too bespoke. It is just too hard coupled to the first-person genre. And they knew that most indies wouldn't necessarily want to make just first-person shooters. But then that begs the question, we have Dota, right? Who plays Dota? Anyone? This is not a first-person shooter. This is a UI-heavy, right, third-person MOBA game that's pretty much League of Legends, right? And so, what's the deal here? Anyone have any idea? Without more information, we can pretty much just speculate. Any idea? Yeah.
Maybe they don't give help to external teams.
Sure.
You know, like DICE was with teams when they were mandated to help with Frostbite.
Mm-hmm. Maybe they're not big enough to really provide good support. Who knows? I will tell you one conversation I had with a lead developer at Valve, literally sitting next to me on my flight to GDC a few years ago. Valve at that time was a very directionless company, very aimless, just kind of chilling, right? A little bit vegging on the couch, enjoying their money printer that was Steam. Interestingly, Valve is not a public corporation. They're not that big. They are a privately held entity. There's one person who can force Valve to do anything. Do you know who that person is?
Gabe Newell.
Gabe Newell. And if he is hanging out in New Zealand and just chilling and enjoying his hobbies, what are they going to do? Right? Now, Gabe is very interested and excited with VR, and so we got our Half-Life VR game. We got our Half-Life, we got our VR hardware. If Gabe was never super interested in making an engine and pursuing that business opportunity, then there were no investors to force that, okay? So it's a very interesting thing, thinking about the dynamics between public and private companies, who owns what kind of stakeholders are involved. It's really interesting, okay? Anyway, so this was largely a PC-only engine. Most of the products coming out of it were only on PC. It did get some interesting ports to PlayStation 2, and it had a very big console port that happened when the Orange Box came out in 2007, which was basically a package of Portal, Team Fortress 2, and Half-Life 2. It came out on 360, and it came out on PS3 with a very poor port, and Gabe threw a bunch of shade at PS3's architecture. So that could have been a part of it, right? It was not targeting console. It wasn't targeting that many platforms. For a while, it didn't even target Mac or Linux. It was just Windows only, right? So anyway, a very high-impact engine, even if maybe it did not take off like Unity or Unreal, it is still around. You can still use it. You can find it. You can download it yourself, and that is pretty cool, okay? All right. So what I want to do, I realized one of the things that happens when you create a new course is there are content gaps that you don't quite notice. One thing I realized is that we built a really cool feature for you and then forgot to tell you about the feature. Okay? Now, if you've come to office hours, there's a good chance I've told you and shown you this feature. I want to show you the ghost player. Okay? When you send a commit and the autograder clones your project and then begins feeding it, okay, with fake inputs, right, with test cases, swapping in the resources folder, all that stuff, the way it does it is by basically taking the SDL user input.txt file and putting it next to your engine. What does that do? Well, I want to show you, okay? Right here, look at this code base right here, okay? This is your solution code. You can steal if you catch a glimpse of it. But this is the engine, okay? When I run it, it's going to quit out immediately. We don't have a resources folder. Now, let's say that I'm messing up test case 9.0, okay? Well, what can I do? If you're failing out or if you're getting timed out, one thing you should do right away is you should try and replicate that issue locally. If you can replicate it locally, you can work backward and debug and figure out what's going wrong. If you can't replicate locally, that's when we're in a bit of trouble, okay? That's when we need to start getting experimental, and I get a little bit panicked when you tell me it's happening only on the autograder. I can't replicate it locally, okay? Because that's spooky, all right? Here's what you do. You download the test case. It'll come in a folder like this. You're going to see a resources folder and an SDL underscore user underscore input.txt. You're going to grab both of them, okay? We're going to copy them both to your project folder. We're going to put them in the root of your folder right next to your project, okay? Now, when you run your engine, what's going to happen is it's just going to start playing automatically, right? I have no hands on the keyboard, and it's just playing through the test case, and then it will end, okay? It better end. If it doesn't end, you've detected your bug. You've reproduced it locally, okay? What's happening here is that if you look inside of the SDL user input file, this is a file that is a little bit hard to read, but it's basically here saying on frame 5, press the right arrow key. I think that's right arrow key. Okay, and this moves your character next to Billy, and you start taking damage. On frame 382, we click the red X in the corner of your window, and that sends the SDL quit event through, okay? And this is just going to automatically happen. You don't have to do anything, okay? And this is by the way, what the helper.h file is up to. It basically mocks and feeds you fake inputs, and that's how the test case runs. Your ghost player. Now, this might not replicate the issue. And if it doesn't, then we need to make one more change, okay? On the autograder has an environmental variable called autograder set. And when that variable is set, your helper files will act differently than normal. You can actually look in the source code to see what they will do, okay? The audio helper, for instance, will turn off and refuse to run most of the underlying audio SDL functions. Now, why would we do this? The autograder does not actually run SDL's audio-related functions. Why would we do this? Anyone know? Yes, in the back. The autograder does not have ears. Now, this normally wouldn't be a problem, but Linux ruins everything here because the Linux autograder is headless. It doesn't even have a sound card, and it will explode if you try and call an SDL function, which really messes things up on the autograder. And so we do not actually use any of the functions if you're in autograder mode. Same thing for helper.h. It will function differently if you're in autograder mode. Here, at least on Windows, is how you easily enter autograder mode, okay? We're going to right-click on your game engine project. We're going to go to debugging, okay? Go to environment. We're going to edit it. Now we can enter any sort of environmental variable we want. So autograder equals true, okay? Good, and now when we run it, we're going to notice it's already doing something different, okay? It's not actually showing us the frame in our window. That's because the autograder doesn't actually care what's on your window. It cares what kind of bitmaps you're putting on the disk. And it'll compare those bitmaps to see on what frame you diverged, okay? Anyway, sometimes you will not be able to find or reproduce your error locally if you're not in autograder mode, but if you switch to autograder mode, you will find the error, and then you can work backward, okay? So that is what I recommend, and if you're having troubles, please do that, and then if you can't replicate it, come to us, okay? And we'll try and help you figure out what's going on. On other platforms like Linux and Mac, right, they're both Unix-based, and so you're not going to do it this way. You can go into your terminal, and you can go export, and then autograder equals true, okay? And that will create that environmental variable there on that platform. And it should work the same way, okay? You can clear it just by coming in here, deleting it, and then we're all good, okay? So I hope you make use of that. It should make your lives easier, save you a bunch of time, hopefully. Yes?
That variable did what again? I'm so sorry.
The autograder variable?
Yeah.
It tells the helper files that you're on the autograder, which changes how they work a little bit, which can produce errors. A big one, and a reminder on this homework 5 as you finish things up, when you get a pointer from mix load wave, and what an awful function name, right? It feels dirty to use that to load an OGG file. Do not free that pointer, okay? Do not free that pointer. On the autograder, that function will return to you a fake chunk, okay? A chunk that doesn't actually exist. If you try and free it, you're going to blow up, okay? So don't do that, okay? All right, and if you forget, just look at the spec. Yes, apologies for the autograder .h nastiness this week. One thing that happened was when you got one person, right, when you got Nikhil going through the assignments, right, he uncovers a lot of bugs that we're able to fix, and it's amazing. When you have 55 people going through your assignment, they find things and run into issues that were very hard to find, okay? Some subtle issues. What's also interesting is that they approach problems in a unique way that you did not anticipate, and then you have to kind of go back to your tech and try and find a way to make those approaches work. Valid approaches, okay? And so we kept finding new ways to use these helper functions that we didn't anticipate, and that using them in that way will break on the autograder. So we had to do a lot of things last week late to get in there and try and make the technology better. The first solution we think of is, oh goodness, we can just tell the students not to use our functions in a certain way. That's not great. Why? Because, I mean, you miss that stuff, right? It's very easy to miss those elements of guidance and get yourself blown up, even if it's in the spec, even if it's highlighted in red, bold, underlined, whatever. And the second, more expensive solution is to take a ton of time and to actually fix your tech and make it better, which is what we ended up doing. And every time we give you a new helper.h, an audio helper.h, it is usually because a student tried to use our functions in a way that's valid but didn't work or blew them up, okay? And so this is to say, thank you for your patience. And also, when you use our tech, let us know how that goes. Let us know if it's not working the way you expect, and we will try and improve it. And that's very important for future semesters, okay? And making the course great long term. So I hope, I know you're spending a lot of time on homework 5. Know that I really do appreciate it. And I hope you're spending a lot of time on it. I hope you're at least getting something out of it, okay? All right, keep that image in mind. One day you will be the person that everyone comes to help solve the linking and include issues. And that's gonna feel pretty good, I think. People on your team, people you care about will lose a lot of time to these issues, and you'll be able to help them, okay? It always makes me feel good when I can help a student out with these issues and try and explain it. So hopefully that'll be you very soon, okay? All right, extensions, a reminder, homework 5, 48 hours, right? You got a little bit less than 48 hours from now to get your stuff in, okay? In general, we are gonna keep a very close eye on how students are doing, and we're not gonna hesitate to pull the trigger on extensions, okay? To try and make this experience, this pre-alpha course experience, as bearable as we can for you, okay? So let us know how you're doing, let us know how you're feeling, and don't panic too much, okay? If you're having a difficult time on something, I guarantee others are as well, and if a lot of people are having a difficult time, we'll be there to help, okay? And push things back if we need to. Homework 6 is delayed 24 hours. We don't really want to delay more than that because that starts to cascade, but we will if we have to. Okay, we'll keep an eye on things. Hopefully homework 6 is going to be pretty interesting and not as frictionful as homework 5 has been. Okay? All right. Oh, yes. We have quite a few students now who have finished homework 5 100%. Not that many, right? So don't feel like you're too behind, but it appears that the assignment is now totally doable. So good stuff. One really interesting thing that was funny in a sad way, your timeout issues that were happening to pretty much everyone, a lot of those were disguised. And I couldn't believe it, right? I felt betrayed by the autograder and Windows. Couldn't believe Windows would stab me in the back like this. But what happened was that if you had a DLL-related issue, for instance, you weren't running that post-build command that I showed you in the video, right? Your executable was launching, but then this issue would happen where it couldn't find the DLLs. It would fail, and when this pop-up window comes up, it actually hangs your program, which causes it to get timed out and killed by the autograder, which means that all of our DLL issues were disguised as timeout issues. And the big thing here is that it caused students to focus their attention on other things, which is not good, okay? That means you're going to work all day, you keep getting timeout issues. When if the autograder just said, hey, you got a DLL issue, very good chance you could move quickly to solve that. So anyway, I believe we've addressed this, at least on Windows. I don't think it'll happen on Mac and Linux because they responded to missing DLLs in a different way. Anyway, yeah, and who's surprised, right? Windows is a GUI, right? Highly visual operating system, so it's no surprise that they blow up your terminal apps in this way, okay? Now the autograder tries to suppress those kind of things when it runs the Windows version of your engine, okay? Anyway, anyone have any idea, I know the answer's here, any idea on why the resolution is so low in your footage, okay? It's actually for performance. So no joke, over the summer when I was like putting this technology together and experimenting with it, I finally got my engine with the prototype helper script, writing each frame to disk. And I was like, yes, let's go. Wait, why is my frame rate like 5 frames per second? my engine was going so slow, and I couldn't believe it. Well, I was printing 1920 by 1080 frames to disk, and they weren't bitmaps, they were PNGs. So the performance was awful, okay? And we can't have that, right? When you've got thousands of frames potentially in a test case, that could take minutes just for one test case. So we had to switch to a lower resolution, which means less data we're putting out to disk, which means faster write times on those files and compression times. We also had to move from PNG to BMP, which is a much less efficient format in terms of storage, but it's way faster to write those and create those images. So that's why, okay? And it's not something I expected to happen, but it's exactly what happened. Yeah, this is why experiments are so important. You can do all the planning in the world, but as part of your planning, you've got to get in there and experiment with your tech to find out what the issues might be, okay? All right, the last thing that I want to ask you about, right, I saw a lot of you using Pragma once in your code base. Now, that's probably going to be fine, but it might make a few people on future teams of yours a bit twitchy. Anyone know why?
Is it because Pragma wants this like a C++ thing, not a C thing?
I think it's because it's actually not an official part of the spec or standard. It's just a very common like custom compiler feature that most compilers have, but that technically they aren't guaranteed to have. And so the include guard approach is actually, I think, in the spec, right? Compilers must support that, and so that is typically what you see a bit more often. It is a bit ugly and involves more typing, and I'm talking about basically this, right? You see Pragma once at the start of a file. Yeah, it's trying to do basically the same thing as include guards, but more elegantly. It looks better than this business right here. Well, no, that's not right. Right here, okay? If endf, define, and then endif at the bottom, okay? So keep that in mind if you're ever asked about that in an interview or anything like that. The last thing I saw was a ton of usage of static, okay? Anyone know why usage of static will make some of your future engineers twitchy? If you're in an interview and they see your code base, they say, hey, I noticed a bunch of static. Aren't you a bit nervous about that? What do you say?
It can be hard to tell like what, especially if you have static variables, what's modifying them. So
Yeah,
basically.
Yes, so static variables are kind of global state, and it's global state for the entire lifetime of your program, which can be a bit spooky, right? It's not as bad as a purely global variable because it's not going to pollute the global scope. It's going to be contained to that class's scope, but you can run into a category of bugs that deal with stale state. For instance, if you have some information in a static variable, but then, the game session ends and you want to start a new one, you have to remember to reset that static variable to that default value. And if you forget, boom, instant bug, okay? And so it is a bit risky. It can expose you to some bugs if you do not remember some things. But in general, and this is kind of a more general takeaway, there are a lot of code smells that can appear on various teams and that people like or dislike. Right? On certain teams, this stuff is fine. On other teams, the standard might be, hey, we don't do this. In my experience, the most important thing is to have a philosophy and to have some sort of rationale for the choices that you make, okay? If you decide that you like to use static, just know why and know what the risks are, okay? Some teams will be okay with it, some teams won't. Your opinions might change over time, but make sure during an interview, if someone sees your code base and asks you why you made these decisions, why are you using this feature, this dangerous feature, just make sure that you have a rationale for it, okay? And make sure you can explain to them that you understand the risks and make them confident that if the team doesn't use that kind of stuff, you won't either, okay? So there you go, all right? Okay, all right. So the second half of our lecture today is going to be dedicated to office hours. Okay, and this is definitely to help all of you out on homework 5 and not because we're running low on lecture content like we said we would, okay? And so before we get to that, I want to talk to you about the input manager pattern, okay? This is not something that is essential. This is something that is very nice. And I think it's a good example of how the abstractions you create can actually go a ways to making your code base more elegant, okay? In many cases, we want to remove features. We want to keep things as simple as possible to keep our code base expandable and elegant and easy to use. This is kind of an example of the opposite. We're going to build a system that is going to feel very natural. It's going to be very easy to use. And as a result, we'll get away from the spookiness, the spaghettiness of the event queue, okay? So let's go ahead and take a look. And by the way, if you've taken any of our other courses or used Unity, this is going to be very familiar to you. It's going to be very nice. I hope you enjoy building something like this, okay? By the way, this also might be very useful to you on homework 7 when you need to give a similar API to all of your Lua game designers, okay? So one of the kind of fundamental questions when it comes to game design is answering this question, okay? What is our user's current intention at this exact moment? At this exact frame, what is the user trying to tell us, okay? And this is usually a button press, okay, in the context of games. But more and more, right, this is getting more and more interesting, okay? The question of what is my user trying to indicate right now got more complicated when touch screens came into the picture. And we are on the cusp of an even more complicated situation, okay? Have you seen the Vision Pro, anyone? Right, you've seen the footage of people walking around with it. You'll see them doing interesting gestures with their hands. And you can see this lady has a, I believe it's like a kind of a pinch gesture you use to, I think, select things. And you can also see that she like throws away the board. She swipes up, right, with her hand, which is pretty cool. I imagine being on like a throne and I'm like, get away, right? That's going to be pretty cool when we get one. In fact, I think there's going to be one at the Pierpont Commons relatively soon. I saw there's going to be an event there where you can try out the Vision Pro. So that's going to be very cool, okay? One question is how to gauge your inputs. And we already know a way to do it, okay? You've already been using it on homework 5. This is the SDL event queue, and we went over it pretty extensively in the past, right? You remember this, okay? Tons of events from our program, from our operating system coming through the SDL event queue. We pluck them out. We do things with them, all right? And by plucking them out, we run through the queue. We keep the queue from getting jammed and keep our program functioning well, okay? It looks something like this, right? You iterate through your queue. You check what kind of event just came out of the queue. And depending on the kind of event, you can get more information about it and react to that in different ways, okay? So a question for you, if you are using this kind of setup, how could you detect that a key was just released on this frame? The user just released that key. First of all, why would you want to know something like that? What's a good use case for knowing when the player just released the key? Yes?
You want to do like crouching or something, and you want the user to stop crouching.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe you've got a hold mechanic, right? Where the player can charge up their Mega Buster weapon, okay? So you detect when the key's pressed down, and then you need to detect when it's released so you can let that projectile fly, okay? That's a great one. Another one is jumping, so variable jump height. You know, in many platformer games, if you tap the jump, you do a tiny jump, right? But if you hold it, you do, right? And you keep going up. If you can detect when the player has released the key, you can grab the player character's upward vertical velocity and you can nerf it. You can cut it in half. You can do whatever you want to create that mechanic, okay? Very useful. But riddle me this, how would you implement something like this with this event queue? I'll tell you, I don't really want to think about it, okay? Because this is kind of an awkward setup, kind of an awkward abstraction for getting at that, isn't it? what would you do? Any idea? What's the play? What's the play here?
Would you have to like manually save when that key was last pressed and like the frame it was on, and then calculate how many frames it's been since it was last pressed?
That's a way you could do it. So what I would do is I would introduce additional state, right? I would introduce basically a Boolean variable here that probably says like, is jump key pressed? When I see the key down come through and hey, it's the jump key, it's the space bar maybe, or the up arrow key, I set the bool to true, and then I wait until I see a key up event coming up, and then I can set it to false and all that stuff. How do you check this stuff from a different file? How do you get these events coming through the queue into a different file? Yeah.
We have to save them in some way, like to a Boolean.
Yeah, you might have to save them or persist their state in some way. If you want a different system to know that a key down event just came through, you probably have to pass it to that system. And yeah, it's just kind of nasty, right? For every system that you create that cares about this stuff, you're going to have to pass it in this while loop. It's going to make your while loop look really nasty. It's going to get a bunch of dependencies flying everywhere. And it's going to be a bit spaghetti, okay? Not ideal, all right? Not ideal at all. So let's say your objective here is to respond to a button press, okay? I'm going to show you two ways to do this, okay? The first is our classic event queue. We've got the Python, the Pygame version of this, okay? Look at, we got like two loops and then an if statement. We got a little state in here. Like, this is kind of nasty, all right? This gigantic little mountain of code just to detect that you pressed the right arrow key, all right? But hey, if it's the best you got, it's the best you got. Okay, but what if you had this? Nice. What is this? It's a simple function called input.getKey. Which key do you want? I want the right arrow key. Okay? It returns bool to tell you if it is pressed or not. Which one of these would you prefer? Okay? One of these can only be accessed, well, this one can probably be accessed from other places. But what's interesting here is that I'm pretty sure once you get this event out of the event queue, you need to use it or pass it around. Okay? If you try and grab the event queue from another location, you're not going to get that event. All right? You're going to get the next event. And so over here on the bottom, we can actually call this function as much as we like. We can call this function from anywhere in our entire code base, no big deal. Okay? It's pretty nice, isn't it? Okay, so this is an input queue approach up here. This is what we would typically call an event or an input manager, okay? And it's going to allow you to easily access your inputs and their states from any part of your code base at basically any time. We can also access and get a feel for the different states that our key could be in. So an example, right? Let's go ahead and design an API. Let's say that we want to create an input class. And don't let me design your engine code base for you. But this is a way you might think about designing it, okay? Let's create a new class called input. And let's ask ourselves, well, what might the callers of or users of an input class, what might they want to know, okay? They might want to answer the question, is a certain key down at the moment, all right? They might want to know, was that key pressed at this exact frame, okay? Now, why would that be useful? Anyone ever play a platformer, right? You only want to jump on that one first frame that you press space. You want to keep jumping into the sky, right? And so that might be useful. You might also, as we talked about, want to know, was that key released on this exact frame? Okay, so we can do our jumping logic, right? So we can do our charging logic, okay? And for this, to answer these three questions, we're going to have three different functions. We're going to have a static function called getKey. It returns a bool, okay? It's just a yes or no question. And it's going to take an SDL scan code unknown, okay? What does scan code represent? Yeah. Bingo. Yep. Basically, yeah. And there are a few different ways to get at that concept of what key is this. Scan code is only one of them. But we're going to go with those, okay? And we have another question we can answer with this function, get key down, okay? Get key down is true on the one frame, the first frame that the value, that the key gets pressed down. And then we've got get key up, which is similar. It's only true on the one first frame in which the key is released, okay? And then it goes back to false, all right? And so when we add these, right, we're building out our API. We've got a bunch of public functions. This is basically our interface right here, okay? Right there. Why do we make it static? We just complained about static a little bit. What can go wrong? Why, in this case, might it be a decent decision? And I'm pretty sure Unity made their static as well. Pretty sure pretty much everyone makes their static. Yeah.
Like it makes it exist across all of your programs. You don't have to have an instance of input class like every single thing.
That's the big one. You don't need to make an instance of anything to use this function because it's not associated with an instance. It is a part of the overall class itself, okay? And so that is why it might be useful here, okay? And if any of this sounds familiar, right, we've already said it, this is literally the Unity API, okay? In fact, if you release this engine commercially, like, I don't know, maybe you want to change the terminology a bit, Mr. Riccatello could be sending you letters, who knows, okay? Actually, there was a court case not that long ago between Oracle and Google over the question of, it was a Supreme Court case, over the question of like, is an API copyrightable? I'm not sure how that turned out, but certainly it's got to be settled by now. Okay, anyone know how that turned out? I'm gonna have to go look it up. Anyway, this is literally the Unity API. So if you've used Unity, this will hopefully be pretty comfy for you. Okay. A big question though is how do we implement something like this? Okay. Well, we need some way to kind of track what the status of each key code is. We could represent each possible key to press by the SDL scan code data type, but we need some way to like track, is it down, is it not, right? Is it just down, is it just up, okay? And so we need to design a key lifecycle. If you mess around with your keys and really think about the different states it could be in, the states that we care about, right? Every key is going to start in the key up status. Right? Now, this isn't always true. Sometimes you launch your engine and the player's already like holding spacebar. Okay? We're not going to worry. We're not going to worry about that situation. Okay? We'll keep it relatively simple. But the key up state is where all of your keys are going to start. Okay? Now, if a key down event, SDL key down event, comes through the queue, we need to change the state of that key code. Okay? We change it to down, but just down. Okay? Not the normal down, it just became down. Okay? Then we wait until the next frame. And now it's not just down anymore. Okay? It's now just down. Okay, that was really confusing vocally. Okay? But it's a different state to have just entered the down state versus, okay, we've been down for a while. Then, if the player releases the key, as in we get an SDL key up event coming through, then we can change it to key just up. And after frame, it can go back to that initial state. So this is the life cycle, all right? And each of our keys will cycle through all these states based on these events that come through, okay? So we need to keep track of these states. What are they? We can create an enum for that, okay? Call it something like input state. We got our 4 states right there. Kind of verbose, but that's how I tend to do it in my code bases. Okay? So you can use an enum if you want to. We can use kind of a lot of data structures if we want to. And this might not be the most efficient. Right? Some of you might want to try just a raw array. That could probably work. But here, I'm just using, I feel like I'm using unordered map for everything. Dictionaries are just amazing. I like them a lot. But here, we have a static unordered map of the scan code representing our keys pointing to the state, okay, the input state. All right, we call it keyboard states. You will, on homework 7, need to implement states for a mouse, okay? And so you'll have to do that yourself. one question, why does it have to be static? Here. I suppose it doesn't have to be, but it's kind of convenient for it to be. Yes?
Because the static functions need to use it.
Yeah, the static functions here are going to be messing with and checking this data structure, and so we probably should make it static as well. Okay, here's a harder question. Why is it inline? What does inline do in this context? Yes?
You taught me this one. It defines
Oh.
it right there.
Yes, that's right. So it creates a definition for this object right there, right in the header file, okay? If you don't have that inline keyword, you have to go into the CPP file, and you have to basically, you're kind of just copying and pasting the whole thing. Feels weird to me. I don't like it at all. I think the syntax is ugly when you do it that way. It's a shame we need this inline, but so anyway, yeah, you can use inline to make your H files slightly more pretty, I guess, or keep your CPP files a little bit cleaner, okay? Anyway, right, all keys begin in the key up state, and we can put them all into that up state via a function like new, or init. Okay, this is what we'll run at the beginning of the game engine to get things going. And you can see here, we actually have a pretty cool way. SDL anticipated that we would care about this, that we might want to do it this way. So they actually provide us with this variable SDL num scan codes, which is basically the final scan code. So we can iterate an integer from 0 up to it, and we can then cast them into the scan codes, okay? Integers, enums, right? I mean, they're basically integers. We can go through and very easily set them all to their default state. What's really cool is if SDL updates and adds more scan codes, maybe new keyboards are coming out, they got to add more scan codes, this code should probably still work, okay? They will update the value of SDL num scan codes, and we'll iterate through more buttons and controls and all that, and we'll initialize more stuff, okay? So this is going to be a decent way to do it, I think. As events come in, we have to make that life cycle go, okay? How do we do that? Well, our input system, our input manager, has to somehow get access to those events, okay? So we talked about it, right? We have to get the event at the beginning of the frame. We also have to run some logic at the end of the frame too, right? To advance all of our just states into the actual resting state, okay? And so how are we going to do this? Well, we can have two functions, process event, and this is one where we pass in the event, okay? And then late update, which we'll call right at the end of the frame. All right. This is what we tried to get away from, because we don't want to be passing our events all over the entire code base, but this is an area where, hey, we do it once, we send it to the input system, and then everything else can just use the input system to check the state of all of our inputs without us needing to pass those event objects around everywhere, okay? So a small sacrifice, we put it right at the beginning of our event polling loop, and that way our inputs will be all up to date and fresh for any other system that might want to use them, okay? There are probably better ways to do this, to decouple things further, but this is probably going to be the most straightforward approach for you, okay? All right, inside of that process event, right, we get the event and we need to check what it is. If it's not a key down event or a key up event, then we don't really care, okay? If it is a key down event, right, we need to use the scan code to index into our map, and then we're going to set the value of that key to be just became down, right? Because it's the first frame that we've pressed down on that key. If it's key up, we do the opposite, right? We mark it as just became up. You notice, and this is something I don't think we actually have to do. I'm not sure if this is actually saving us any performance. I'd have to do some tests. But another thing I'm doing is as soon as a key is pressed, I take note of that key. I store that key we just pressed into a vector so that we can process it a little bit later at the end of the frame, okay? Just became down scan codes. This is a vector of keys, okay? A vector of key codes, scan codes, all right? Yeah, adjust the key state and then optional probably. You could also just probably like scan through the scan through the map if you want to and just set everything. But then you can't really do an unordered map, can you? Can you iterate through an unordered map? You'll just get it in a random order. That's the case?
You'll get it in the external stored order.
Okay. All right. At the end of the frame, at the end of our frame, very end, we'll call late update on the input system. And here, we're just going to scan through all of those key codes that were marked just became down. We're going to set them to just normal down. They're resting now. It's no longer that first frame. So they're no longer just down. Now they're just down. Okay? And gosh, that was... Every time I say that, it sounds weird and hard to understand. Anyway, I clear out my key codes so we can get more on the next frame. We do the same thing for the just became up key codes, okay? And we just mark them as simply up, all right? And there you go. As the next frame arrives, we're going to update our just keys down to their kind of natural resting state, okay? When it comes to actually implementing these other functions, okay, the main functions that we designed, these right here, now it's simply a matter of looking in to our map and checking what the state of that key is. Okay? Is a key down? Well, grab the map's value, grab the key's value in the map, check if it's in the down state or the just down state. Okay? And you now have your answer. All right? And so this isn't too bad, is it? Right? Kind of fun to implement. Once you think it through, it works pretty well. And you can now write code that is similar to, let's see here, that's similar to this. All you'll do from any place in your code base, you just do input, get key, okay? And then you'll grab the SDL scan codes. Oh, so SDL, what is it again? Is it key code write or something like that? It's something like this, okay? And then this function will return true if the player is pressing right, and false if it's not, okay? And so this is something that as your gameplay logic gets a little bit more complex on homework 5 and then on homework 6, you might want to add, okay? Could make your code base a little bit nicer. And on homework 7, you're literally going to have to give this, but to your Lua designers, okay? And that's going to be pretty fun. I hope you look forward to it. Okay? Does anyone have any questions? Ravi?
So, what if I'm like a super gamer god and I like press and release the key in the same frame?
If you press and then release the key in the same frame.
Yeah, so when you go to your event loop, you're
Yeah.
a press and then a release.
Yep. So what would happen with this implementation is the first event would come through and that key, that space bar, whatever you're doing, would get set to the just down state. But then the key up would come through and it would get set to the just up state, right? So just down state, then just up state. And so that wouldn't really be detected. But I don't think like Unity's input manager detects that either. Maybe it does?
I don't think it does. I think it's one of the...
No, that's kind of one of the downsides. None of your test cases care about that. But usually in environments like this, there are not just things like the input manager to access these events. If you're really needing to capture that, then you can usually set up callbacks, right? Interface with some event system, and maybe even they have something like a PubSub going on. And you can get those events and deal with them in a different way. But I think most games don't really care about that too much. Anyway, yeah, good question. Good question. Elite gamer tech. That's not going to be enough for your final project, just implementing that, okay? Yes?
I think, what would your code do like, at the end of the frame? Is it uses the things in the vector, right?
So the code, like the late update?
Yeah.
So late update is just about getting the just states to evolve into their natural state.
And like if you press down and up in the same frame, what would that do?
So if you press down and up on the same frame, well, whatever input you did last. Wait, do you mean like you pressed the spacebar and then immediately released it the same frame?
Yeah. Like what Robbie was
Yeah, well, yeah, we just said it. So what happened is your key state gets set to just press down, and then the up event would come through, it would get set to just up, right? And then as soon as the frame is ended, you'd run all of your gameplay logic, and then when you're done with that, at the end of the frame, it would just evolve to up, right? That's how this logic would work. Yes?
How exotic are like the key codes that are available? Like, do they support like macros and stuff like that?
They're pretty exotic, I think. Like, there are a lot of them in there. Maybe we can, let me see.
It supports most of what USB keyboards can give you.
SDL scan code 0. Let's go find these things. Here we go. All right, what do we got? So we got 0 here. Somehow we jumped to 4. A, B, C. So we got the keyboard in here. We got numbers in here. We got some popular keys in here. Minus, backslash, non-US hash, semicolon, apostrophe, a grave, F keys, slash, comma, period, caps lock, print screen. Oh my goodness, we got a lot of stuff. I'm not sure what, let me see, numlock clear, okay. I like how some of these are obscure and have to explain kind of what they are. Application power. I think in here we might even get some like, yeah, we got volume up, volume down, okay. I think that's got to be like Mac keyboards, some of those. I think we might even get some like touch screen events in here too. Decimal, okay, mode. I don't really know what they're, oh my goodness. Mail, AC search, calculator, computer,
Oh, that's like the support for mobile.
eject, sleep. Yeah, we're getting like mobile support here. Display switch, brightness setting. Oh goodness, okay. And I guess that's pretty much it. I'm pretty sure I'm allocating more memory than I need to, because we're iterating ourselves all the way up to 512. So anyway, if you want to go faster, maybe than the staff solution, maybe you don't do all of these. Okay, maybe you just do the ones that are valid in here. Anyway, cool. Call and end call. Nice. Okay. So, any final questions before we launch office hours? Okay. Okay, the takeaway here is this. Ask yourself how people programming in your engine, programming in your code base are going to want to use and answer questions. And if you could answer those questions in a really nice, friendly way, that can actually make your code base cleaner by adding to it. That's not usually how it goes. Usually you want to take away things. You want to remove things. In this course, I have a tip for you. When you're thinking about adding efficiency, acceleration data structures to try and answer certain questions, implement them, but then test them. Make sure they're actually giving you a performance boost. If the performance boost is really small or hard to detect, cut it out of your code base, okay? Sometimes you sacrifice a little bit of performance to keep your code base nice, easy to maintain, easy to add other stuff onto, and nice and efficient. I think we talked about this last time, but if you really need to squeeze every drop of performance out, sometimes what you'll do is you'll get to the end of a game project, you'll go in and say, okay, you know what? Everything we do from now on, we're not going to keep, okay? And you'll pollute and make your code base nasty to get every drop of performance, and then you move on and get rid of those things when you go to the next project, okay? Sometimes that happens. All right, okay. Everyone, let's go ahead and do some office hours. You got a full staff here, okay? So please come up and ask if you've gotten a challenge, and good luck on your homework 5, okay? I'm going to reset the autograder, the Windows 1 autograder after class, okay? All right, everyone on Twitch, thank you for coming. Thank you for watching. We will see you next time, and be sure to come if you can, if you want office hours during these kind of shorter lectures, okay? Good luck on homework 5. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.